Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Poe, and today I'm doing my favorite reads from 2021. So this is a collection of some of my favorite books that I read in this past year. Not all of them were published in 2021, but I read them in 2021, and this was such a hard list to make. I really love a lot of the books that I read, and I read a lot of books in 2021, and I ended up with actually 90 books that were 5-star reads, so trying to get it down to a shorter list was quite hard. But the way that I do my favorite reads is that I give you my top 3 books in 10 different categories. So it's still quite a lot of books to talk about, but trust me, I really did pare down my favorites, and so many amazing books didn't make this list. So I'm going to talk about each of these different categories. I will have timestamps linked down below, so you can jump around if there's some genres that you're interested in, some that you're not. And I do have them ranked within that, so number 3, then number 2, then number 1. All of these books are absolutely fantastic. I have reviews for quite a few of them, so I will put like a little symbol if it has a review for that, and also in the description box below, I'll have all of those reviews linked. Usually I also include content warnings, but I'm positive that I'm going to go over the character limit for the description box. So instead, if you click on the Goodreads links for the books, you'll see a mini review that I have done there, and that'll list the content warnings. So let's go ahead and get started. There's a lot of books to talk about. I will try to be brief, but that's always very hard for me. The first category is nonfiction, starting with You Look Like a Thing and I Love You by Janelle Shane. This is an amazingly funny book that also presents a really good overview of the state of AI currently. Janelle Shane does such an amazing job at writing this book in a way that is incredibly funny, both for people who are new to AI as well as people who are experienced in AI. It does a really good job too of explaining what the limitations of the modern implementations of AI are, and why we need to be a little bit careful when we start talking about how AI is going to solve everything. AI is really good at certain things, and at other things it's quite bad. And so this book is filled with a lot of just examples of the way that AI can behave really weirdly and in a way that maybe humans wouldn't expect. If you're totally new to AI, I actually really heavily recommend this because I think it gives you a lot of tools to understand what's going on. Absolutely loved this book. Next is Because Internet by Gretchen McCulloch. This is a linguistic analysis of the language that we use to speak online. It is such a fascinating look at the way that internet speech has changed from its inception in the 1980s through now, the way that that differs from the way we speak in person, or the way that we write formal letters or write different things. The informality of the written language online really is what she's analyzing, and it's so fascinating. A lot of things from the way that capitalization or punctuation is used or not used, and what that says about the platform that you're using it on, or who you are, what generation you belong to of internet users, the way that emojis are used, all kinds of things. It is also just such a well-written and funny book. If you have any interest in linguistics, definitely pick this one up. And my top nonfiction of the year was Words Matter, Meaning and Power by Sally McConnell Ginnett. This is another linguistic analysis, but this time delving into the way that we talk about the words that we use, and in particular, the words that we use about identity and about social issues, and why it's so important that we actually do use certain words or not use other words. So it's very much rejecting this idea of, dismissing something as political correctness, and instead saying words have power, they matter. The way that we use them is in fact kind of reinforcing power structures, or really resisting power structures and forming coalitions of movements. She talks about everything from, terminology used about race, about sexual identity, about ability, all kinds of things, and talking about how these can have really big real-world impacts depending on how we use them. Things like the definition of marriage being used to reject people's rights, or words being used to dismiss people or hurt them. So I absolutely loved this. If you have interest in linguistics or in social justice, definitely this is a book to pick up. The next category is memoir, starting with the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. This is a collection of essays that are part memoir, part really review of the world around us. So in these essays, Green looks at different aspects of life, very narrow little pieces, things like Diet Dr. Pepper or Canada geese or many other little things in life. And he talks about them, maybe about their history, but really about their interaction with humanity and what that means. He looks at a lot of things about how humanity has, in particular, affected the world in some negative ways. There's an essay on air conditioning that talks about that. And he talks also about a lot of the injustices of the world, but he does all of these essays with so much hope and so much vulnerability. He talks a lot about his own issues and how those kind of interact with the world, things like depression and anxiety and illness. And I just found these essays to be really, really moving, really beautiful, and I loved them. Next is Saigon by Phuc Tran. This is Tran's memoir of his childhood, of growing up in the Midwest in the US as the child of Vietnamese immigrants, and just how difficult that was. Difficult in terms of not feeling like he fit in, but also difficult just in terms of a lot of the kind of generational trauma in his family from being refugees from the Vietnam War. A lot of that is kind of passed down to him, and he really works through a lot of that here, as well as talking about really what drove him as especially a teenager, in particular classical literature and punk rock. And I just think it's so fascinating. He is clearly somebody who has this huge love of literature, and each of his chapters is sort of playing with the idea of different books of classical literature, and that idea of punk, the idea of rebellion, the idea of nonconformity just goes so interestingly with all of those experiences. And it's just a beautiful memoir of a really interesting intersection of experiences. So I really, really enjoyed his story. And my top memoir is Golem Girl by Riva Lehrer. Riva Lehrer is an artist who also has spina bifida, and she talks about growing up in the 1960s with spina bifida, really only a few years after they even learned how to do things to make kids with spina bifida be able to survive, and just all of that difficulty of growing up disabled in a very visible way in a society where, you know, there was no real expectation that she would grow up to have a normal life. Also growing up Jewish and growing up queer, and how all of that sort of intersected. I especially loved all of the parts where she talks about her adulthood and really coming into herself, into not just her queerness, but into her disability. Really learning that, you know, a lot of that internalized ableism that she had grown up with wasn't for her, and that what she wanted to do was use her art to talk about disability and to highlight it in a lot of ways. And I just loved that story of empowerment, and she's so good at writing her story, and the book is filled with all of these pictures of her life and photos of her paintings. And so it's just so cool to see the way that she has evolved as an artist as well. This was such a cool book, and I really loved it. The next category is graphic memoir, starting with Feelings by Manjit Thap. This is such a cool book that is filled with not just beautiful artwork, but also really, really creative uses of artwork to express emotions. So this book basically follows the emotions that Thap has over the course of a year, the sort of cyclical and rhythmic nature of the ups and downs of her emotions and how that sort of lines up with the seasons. She uses really beautiful images and really creative design and layout and sort of visual metaphor for her emotions that I think was just so imaginative and stunning. It also just has beautiful colors, and I love the way that she draws and just how emotive all of that is. I thought it was incredibly creative and just something very unique that I haven't seen before. Next is I Remember Beirut by Zeina Aberishan, translated from French by Edward Gavin. This is another incredibly unique graphic memoir. In this book, Abirished is basically recalling these moments in time of her childhood growing up in Beirut during the Civil War. And these are not some sort of cohesive narrative. They are instead just these little flashes of memory. If you think back to your earliest memories in childhood, often there's no context around them. You just remember being in a place or the sound of something or the smell of something. And that's what this book is. It's just all of these little 1 or 2 page flashes of memory, impressions that she had, sort of devoid of context. And I thought it was just so unique and so creative, and her drawing style is amazing. I love the stark black and white drawing style that she has with these beautiful curves, and it's just so vivid, the memories and the artwork, and I thought it was incredibly effective. And my favorite graphic memoir of the year was Dancing at the Pity Party by Tyler Feder. This is a memoir of Feder's sort of early adulthood. When she was in college, her mother got cancer, got very sick, and passed away. And so this is a memoir of her experience going through that loss, but also just her memories of her mom and her interactions, and then the grief that happened after that, the way that she and her family processed the loss of her mom. It's just such an incredibly moving memoir. It focuses on grief, which is one of the topics that I love reading memoirs about. And it's just so reflective, thinking about her relationship with her mom and how that has affected her. The drawing style is also just so good. I loved the way that people were drawn and the colors and everything. So this was an incredibly moving memoir that I got so much out of. The next category is middle grade, starting with Cece Rios and the Desert of Souls, which is a fantasy inspired by Latin American mythology that follows a girl who doesn't quite fit in her community. In this community, they are constantly fighting against the creatures, the sort of mythical beings that live in the desert, and they use their worship of the sort of sun fire god and the fire in their souls to fight against that, but Cece sort of has water in her soul. But after her sister is taken by some of these creatures, she has to really figure out how to fight against them and ends up joining a tournament of magic where she has to be brave. I loved all of the magic in this, the focus on family, the focus on figuring out who you are and what your internal strengths are. The battle scenes in this were actually really epic. I thought this was such a great middle grade fantasy. Next is The Year I Flew Away by Marie Arnold. This is a historical fiction / magical realism fantasy set in the 1980s when the main character moves from Haiti to New York to live with her aunt and uncle and cousin in order to have some more opportunities in life, but it is very hard for her to adapt. She doesn't speak the language because French is her native language, and she doesn't fit in, and she feels so out of place. But a witch arrives one day and offers her some wishes to help her fit into her new life, but there is a cost. I loved the way that this book focused on immigration and on the cost of adapting to a new culture in terms of what you have to give up. I love the way that this is all about that experience of figuring out what you really care about and what really matters to you and what it's like to lose parts of your heritage. It had all of the themes that I adore, really cool magic, and I just thought the writing was also very fun. So this is really what I'm looking for in middle grade. And my favorite middle grade was also a fantasy, Lalani of the Distant Sea by Erin Entrada Kelly. This story focuses on Lalani, who lives in this fantasy world, and her people live on an island. This island has a very difficult, harsh life. Very much people are struggling to survive. They don't have enough food, they get ill, these sorts of things. But they are trying to strive for better. And the men in the village who are fishermen, they often go out across to the distant sea to find this mythical island where there's supposed to be good fortune, but often they don't come back. And one day Lalani realizes that she has to make that journey because things have gotten so bad in her village, and she needs that magic in order to save the people she cares about. This story is so fascinating. It is inspired by a lot of Filipino folklore, although it's all melded into something totally fantastic and new. It has a lot of heavier themes in this, especially just things of grief and loss, and really making very hard decisions, and deciding, you know, when to stand up for what you believe, even if the consequences may be quite dark, and just what you have to sacrifice. So I thought that the magic in this was excellent, very creepy, kind of a dark fantasy, and the themes were fantastic. Definitely loved this one. The next category is short story collections, starting with Ripples and Other Stories by Shih-Li. Shih-Li is a Malaysian author, and this collection of stories is sort of interconnected, set in Malaysia in the real world, but with a lot of sort of mythical and magical elements based on a lot of Malaysian history, culture, and myth. And the ways that these stories kind of connect to each other makes it feel like she's painting this picture of this town in Malaysia, and you're getting to know a lot of the different people in the town. The way that she has a lot of really interesting themes that are incredibly feminist, but also focus on a lot of social issues, things like poverty, things like the way that immigrant workers are treated in Malaysia, things like a lot of racial tensions between the different groups in Malaysia. You have people who are, sort of Malaysian descent, and of Chinese and Indian and often more recent immigrant workers, and just all of those tensions and religious tensions. It's just so good. I actually did a discussion video of this with my good friend Freddie at Sluggish Reader. I'll link that below, who is Malaysian, and he's the one who I heard about this collection from, and we both really loved the collection. Next is The Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. This is a collection of stories that focus on Black women, that focus on sort of the way that they interact with the world and a lot of the really hard choices that they have to make. Each of these stories has a woman at its center who is maybe not in a great situation, who has to deal with some of the complexities of navigating the world as a Black woman, some of the compromises that she has to make, or some of the way that the world is set up against her. These stories are just so well written. They have this kind of quiet, just satire or bitterness, very much a little bit on the darker side in terms of having that kind of humor, but acknowledging some of the not so great things about life. But each of these was just so thought-provoking and just such an engrossing read, where you got to know these women and their lives and you empathize so deeply with them. Really great collection. And my favorite short story collection this year was This Strange Way of Dying by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I love so many of Moreno Garcia's works, and this short story collection really epitomizes exactly what I love about her writing. So there's a bunch of short stories in these, and they are all very different, but what they all share in common is what she loves to explore. So these are all about Mexican history and culture and mythology. It takes a very feminist lens and looks at really interesting themes through this sort of magical, fantastical version of different historical periods in Mexico. And it's just so cool. I love getting both the history as well as the myth. It's fascinating. And if you have read a bunch of her different works, you'll recognize that maybe some of these were her attempts to explore one of those ideas before she turned it into a full-fledged novel. Although none of these are exactly the same as any of her novels, you can see some of the elements there. And it was just fascinating. I love her writing, and I loved everything that she explored in these. Really recommend. The next category is romance, starting with The Craft of Love by E.E. Ottoman. This is a historical romance set in the 1830s in New York City, which is not a setting you see very often in historical romance, and it is so well done. E.E. Ottoman is a historian, and so you can really see that he knows what he's talking about in terms of what was going on in New York at that time. This romance is so gentle and so sweet. It centers on a silversmith who is a trans man, and he decides that to work through some of the kind of issues that he had with his mom, he's going to get a quilt made out of some old dresses that his mom had made. And so he contracts with a quilt maker, and in return makes her a silver teapot as kind of an exchange of trades. So this story just focuses on both of them professionally, what they are making as craft people, as well as their connection with each other and their kind of budding friendship and respect for each other and desire to be together and be partners. And it is just the most gentle and sweet romance, filled with also a lot of really cool historical social issues, talking about like workers' rights and about the treatment of professional women and all sorts of cool things. So this was so sweet. Next is A Thorn in the Saddle by Rebecca Weatherspoon, which is the third book in the Cowboys of California trilogy. This is set in LA and follows, in the series, three brothers who own this ranch where they have horses, but also is kind of like a luxury hotel. And this third book follows the eldest brother, Jesse, who has quite a bit of anger issues. But this book is all about him working through those anger issues. A lot of the book is him getting counseling and figuring out what's causing so much frustration and anger and anxiety in his life. And he needs a lot of that help because he starts the book by yelling at his grandmother and her lover when he finds them together because he's so overprotective, which startles the lover, who trips, falls, and gets a fracture in his wrist, which means that the lover's daughter, Lily Grace, ends up very much having it out for Jesse and, having a big talk with him about how that's not okay. But he apologizes and works to get better, and they form a friendship and really a great connection. And she's working through a lot on her own as well, because she's just come from escaping some bad situations in her job in tech where she was sexually harassed and kind of everybody was not upset about it except for her. And so she wants to figure out where she's going next in life because that is not what she wants. And they're just on this journey of growth for both of them, figuring out what they want to do in life and really how to connect and how to move forward. It is a very sweet romance. I loved the characters, and there's a lot of cute interactions, a lot of banter and things like that. So it was a ton of fun. And my favorite romance this year was Man vs. Durian by Jackie Lau. This is the third book in her Baldwin Village contemporary romance series, which is set in Toronto, in Baldwin Village, which has a lot of foodie things. So each of the books in this series follows a woman who owns or works at one of these restaurants in Baldwin Village. This third book follows a woman who used to be in tech, had some bad experiences and left. We see a theme, and is working at her friend's ice cream parlor, but is kind of struggling because she's, one, very angry. She's a prickly person and she's angry about everything that happened and just kind of an angry person, very prickly in general. And her family is pressuring her because they want to see her doing something else with her life, and especially getting involved with a guy. And so she decides to get them off her back. She's going to fake date a guy who comes into the ice cream parlor who's kind of cute. And she lies to them, says that he's a doctor, these sorts of things. But actually, he is the most low-key, easygoing guy. He's a landscaper. He doesn't have these huge dreams in life. He just kind of wants to be enjoying life. He's such a gentle and sweet cinnamon roll of a character, so slow and easygoing, and he's such a fascinating contrast with her, the way that she's super prickly and the way that he's just so soft. And the title, Man vs. Durian, is because her favorite food is durian, which is a very hard thing to like. It is very smelly and very strange. And so he has to kind of, deal with that, where the durian is sort of also representative of her personality. But oh, it's just so much fun. And I think that it's a little bit different from what you see in a lot of romances in terms of the sort of tropes that play out for these characters. So I think this is a hilarious book. It's so cute. It's so fun. I love the characters. And it was just something that brought me so much joy. The next category is contemporaries, beginning with Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera, translated by Lisa Dillman. This is such a short but incredibly intriguing novel. It is about a woman whose brother has crossed the border, basically from Mexico to the US, and her mom needs her to go retrieve her brother. And so it's about her leaving and going on that journey and trying to find her brother. But this is a very interesting story. It feels almost like Alice in Wonderland at times. It's got this almost fantastical feel, even though it's very much set in the real world. The writing style is really unique and really interesting, and I just was so drawn into this book. Even though it's so short, it is just really deep and rich with layers, has so many different interesting themes, talking about connections and loss of connections, about being in between, about bridging different cultures, about losing your own culture, so many different cool things. It is just such a fantastic book. I had a whole discussion video that I did about this with Cynthia at BookWhimsy, so that is in the description box below, and I really recommend this one. Next is Memorial by Brian Washington. This is a contemporary that is about two men. They are in a relationship, but it is kind of falling apart. They've been together for 4 years and they're having some issues. And one day, the mother of one of them, who is Japanese, comes to visit. But the very next day, her son decides to leave to go back to Japan because his father, who's estranged from the family, is dying of cancer, leaving his boyfriend with his mother in their apartment. And so this story is so much about so many different things. It's very complicated people, very complicated relationships. Everybody in this book is incredibly flawed and has a lot of problems and makes a lot of bad choices. But at its heart, this book is about love. It's about connection. It's about being together with people, and how do you love them even though they're so flawed, and how do you love yourself. There's a ton in this too about these parent-child connections, as well as sort of the romantic love, and how do you forgive your parents for not being perfect people. This book I loved so much. It is filled with very difficult characters, but oh, it moved me incredibly deeply. And my favorite contemporary this year was Goodbye Vitamin by Rachel Kong. This is such a cool book. It is basically set up almost like a journal, where we have a woman who decides to move back in with her family because her dad is suffering from Alzheimer's, and her mom is struggling to take care of him. And so she's kind of at a weird place in her life and decides that she can go ahead, move back, and help take care of her dad. And so we see this year play out through these little journal entries. And there is so much humor in this, but so much heart. Just this watching of her father's deterioration, but also the building of a new relationship with her parents as an adult. The relationship that you have to build with your parents when you're an adult is so different from when you're a kid, and she has to acknowledge a lot of the sort of failings as well as complexities of her parents. It is just incredibly well written and just so moving. I loved the themes of just illness and grief and connection and flawed people who are still deserving of love. It was really beautiful. The next category is historical fiction, starting with Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam-ju, translated by Jamie Chang. This is a really fascinatingly formatted book. So this story follows Kim Ji-young from the 1980s, when she is growing up, through kind of her mid-30s in the like 2015. And it is, in a sense, almost like an allegory. Kim Ji-young is a very, very common name in Korea, sort of like Jane Doe. And in a sense, this character is a stand-in for the experience of women in Korea. It's a very, very feminist book, and it takes a look at all of the different ways that the patriarchy in Korea influences the experiences of girls. And it talks about at every turn how Kim Ji-young is sort of faced with this misogyny and this sexism and just all of these issues, and the way that that shapes her and forms her. It is an incredibly hard-hitting book in the way that it talks about these things, but it's also, in a sense, a little bit of a play with the way that it's formatted and some of the commentary that it has. The ending in this in particular, I thought, was just such a good punch of commentary. It was so good. So I really enjoyed this, and it was just such a quick and fascinating read. Next is Here Comes the Sun by Nicole Dennis Benn. So this is set in the basically 1990s in Jamaica, and it follows a woman who works at a hotel, and she's trying to really gain a status and gain more money and gain more power in life. And so she's kind of hustling to do whatever she can do. And on the side, she also runs kind of a prostitution ring. But one of the things that she's trying to do is earn enough money so that her younger sister can continue to go to the kind of elite academy that she's going to and have a future in life that's better than hers. This book is very dark. It is very, very heavy, but it is so well written and so filled with all of these layers. There's a ton of imagery in this, a lot of beautiful language, and just so much emotion. It is talking not just about these women's experiences, but really big, broader social commentary on a lot of the way that women are exploited and the way that Jamaica itself is exploited. And it kind of links those together, and it has just really very harsh commentary on a lot of these things, but it was a beautiful book, if heartbreaking. And my favorite historical fiction of the year was Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. This is a YA sort of coming of age story about a Chinese American teenager in the 1950s in San Francisco. And this book is all about her discovering her own sexuality by going to this basically kind of cross-dressing club in San Francisco, where she sees these male impersonators perform, but also just about her dealing with a lot of the things around her, a lot of the political issues of the 1950s. This was the height of the Red Scare, and so being Chinese American was in itself a little bit of a dangerous thing, but also just how does she deal with her identity of being queer with her community, where 1950s Chinatown in San Francisco, her family, her neighbors are not going to be okay with this. But this story, even though it deals with some of these kind of big punchy themes, is actually a very quiet, very beautiful, very gentle story. I loved the shyness and the introversion of the main character, and I loved the sort of friendship and relationships that she built in this. It is beautiful, so well done. And even if you don't read YA, I think you should for sure give this one a try, because it's just that coming of age story that is so classic and just such a great read. The next category is science fiction, starting with The Citadel of Weeping Pearls by Aliette de Bodard. This is a novella that is set in her Shuya universe, which is this sort of space opera series that is influenced by Vietnamese history, culture, all these sorts of things. So The Citadel of Weeping Pearls is a story about the Empress and her daughters. And so basically, one of her daughters had created this citadel of the Weeping Pearls, but that citadel disappeared many years ago because there was a huge conflict between the Empress and her daughter, who's this kind of scientific genius. but they need that back because there was a lot of weapons and technology that the Citadel was developing, and they need that because there are other forces that are coming to invade the Empire. And so there's this quest to discover what happened to it, but at its heart, this story is also very much about mothers and daughters, about loyalty, about choices, about how do you deal with this conflict between what your family or what your country wants and what you want to do and what your ethics say. And there's just so many interesting things. Plus, it's just this epic science fiction. There's so many cool tech things in this, and so much cool kind of space opera. So this is a really beautiful story, both in terms of the emotional things and in terms of the sci-fi. Such a great story. Next is The Stone Weta by Octavia Cade. This is sort of a near future sci-fi where we have a group of scientists who form a little bit of an underground network in order to collaborate to save data. So things have gone a little bit worse in the world, a lot more ecological disasters, these sorts of things. And a lot of governments and corporations are trying to really obfuscate what's going on, and they don't want the scientists to actually share their real data, and they're fudging the numbers and they're hiding things and all these sorts of things. So these scientists are trying to preserve this data, preserve what's actually going on in the world. But there's some kind of thriller espionage aspects to this. The really cool part of this is that each chapter is told from the perspective of one of these different scientist espionage spies, and they each have code names, and their code names are animals or plants, and you get this little bit of information about that animal or plant at the beginning of each chapter, talking about the ways in which they resist and they survive and they protect themselves. And then in that chapter, you see that sort of play out in terms of the way that that operative is working. It is so cool. If you like nature writing and sort of spy thrillers and sci-fi, really recommend this. And my favorite sci-fi of the year was The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. This is an incredibly beautiful literary sci-fi that I was just so in love with. So this takes place in a far future sort of space opera world where we've got a captain of a ship, Nia Amani, who is basically just running cargo. She's a very disillusioned person, very jaded, just trying to do what she needs to do to survive these sorts of things, and doesn't really have any connections to people, especially because doing these cargo runs requires quite a bit of travel through space, which involves some time dilation, things like that, meaning that time passes differently for the crew there as opposed to on different planets. And so she's very isolated, except that one day a very mysterious boy appears, and the ship takes him in, and they start to build connections with him, especially the captain builds a connection with him. And it's just all about the way that they build that connection, as well as what else is after the boy. There are so many themes in this that are incredibly strong, just such great explorations of emotion and connection and love, and also memory. There's a lot to do with memory in this, especially because in this world, cryogenic sleep is a very big thing, and so you have some characters who are sleeping through vast stretches of time only to wake up. And this idea of, how are they connected to the world around them, and what do they remember, and all of these sorts of really interesting questions. So I loved the way that the science fiction aspects of this book tied in so deeply with the themes of connection and memory. It was beautifully written, almost like poetry at times. It is a little bit more abstract and literary rather than focused on plot in the way that a lot of other sci-fi is, but I thought it was absolutely wonderful. I really recommend this book. And then the last category is fantasy, beginning with The Goblin Emperor by Catherine Addison. So this is a book I've been meaning to get to for years, and of course I loved it so much when I did. It is a fantasy of manners, so it is a sort of a slow book that is really focused on a lot of issues of political intrigue and culture. This is a fantasy world where there are elves and there are goblins, and the goblins are very much a second class, but the the elven emperor and a lot of his sons end up dying in a airship crash. So this is also a little bit of a steampunk world. But his unfavored half-goblin, half-elf son ends up becoming the next emperor. And he is thrown into all of this chaos and all of this difference. He's been kind of exiled through growing up, but now he's the emperor in this elven court that is filled with all of this political intrigue, and he has to both figure out what happened to his dad as well as navigate all of this politics. And so it is filled with all of this fantastic culture and social details, and it's such a rich world. So if you love atmosphere and if you love being immersed in a really complicated world, this is absolutely perfect. There's also that kind of murder mystery storyline that goes through it, which I thought was really, really cool. Next is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, which is the first book in a new series of hers. This is an epic fantasy world inspired by sort of Indian myths and epics. This is such a cool fantasy. I think if you like a lot of these big epic fantasy worlds like Wheel of Time, things like that, you will like this one as well. We've got a ton of different perspectives, so multiple perspective book, lots of different characters, but at the heart of this there are two main characters, Priya and Malini. Priya is basically a maidservant and Malini is a princess, but a princess who is sort of imprisoned in this temple by her brother, the emperor, who is trying to force her to conform to what he wants. And they form sort of an alliance. Priya and Malini form an alliance because really they both have reasons to kind of want to fight against the powers that be in the empire. There's also a ton of magic in this. There is really, really cool magic because there's different people who have different types of magic. But one of the types of magic is very much related to plants and to greenery and to things like that, but it's kind of a dark magic as well. There's also a magical illness that is infecting this world called the rot, where people sort of themselves become plants and die. It's really fascinating. The political intrigue in this is so, so good, and just the world building and the culture, I absolutely loved it. There's also just so much in here that is really about people's relationships, and especially loyalties and torn loyalties and very, very complicated relationships and difficult choices. All of the characters in this have to make some really difficult choices, and you see many of them who have very similar goals pursuing very different ways to get to them. It is just so cool. I absolutely love this kind of fantasy. And then my top fantasy of the year, and probably of the decade, was Realm of Ash by Tasha Suri. I thought about not including two Tasha Suri books on this list, but the thing is, these were just my favorites of the year. I absolutely loved this book. So Realm of Ash is the second book, sort of a companion book in the books of Amha duology. And this book was just everything that I want. It is such a slow and beautiful story of a woman trying to figure out what she should do in life. So it follows a woman who is widowed very young and basically written off by this society. So this is a fantastical world sort of inspired by Mughal India. And she's written off by everybody because widows are nothing without their husbands, but she needs to find purpose. And so she decides that she's going to try to help the empire using some of her inherited magic, which is from the non-imperial side of her blood, and very much looked down upon by the empire. And that requires her to do some different things, as well as to collaborate with a guy who also has some different magic and an illegitimate prince of the empire as well. And they form such a beautiful relationship, so supportive. The magic in this is incredible. I loved the magic in this. It involves a lot of things to do with ancestors and heritage. So this book just does so much in terms of having really fantastical political discussions, great conversations about the choices that you make and what you're willing to do and the costs of that. It has really amazing culture and history and all sorts of great things, and at the heart of it, there's also a love story, which makes me so happy. So this book is excellent if you like slow-paced, really complicated world fantasy with wonderful magic and a sweet romance. So I loved this book so much. Okay, so those were my favorites of the year, or at least the ones I was able to fit into this video. All of these books are just so amazing. I love them so much. So if any of these sound intriguing to you and you haven't gotten the chance to pick them up yet, or you hadn't heard of them before, please give them a shot. They're just such great books. I really loved them. If you've read any of these and you want to chat with me about them, if any of these were your favorites, let me know, or let me know what your favorites of this year were. Anything that you think, based on what I've talked about liking, I should pick up too. I'd love to hear anything that you have to say. Just go ahead and leave me a comment down below.